Welcome to the Summer of Superman. Get ready for an electrifying journey through the iconic tale that shook the world of superheroes 3 decades ago. Moving Panels presents a special series dedicated to the monumental event that changed the course of comic book history, the death and return of Superman. Join us as we dive deep into the pages of one of the most impactful stories ever told, exploring the Man of Steel's ultimate sacrifice and his triumphant resurrection. But that's just the beginning. Experience the thrilling animated movies, The Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman, that brought this epic story to life on the screen. In each episode, we will dissect every chapter, dissecting the emotions and going behind the scenes of this unforgettable saga and its animated counterparts. From the impact on Superman's friends and allies to the worldwide mourning that ensued, Moving Panels will leave no stone unturned, delivering a comprehensive exploration of this milestone in comic book history. So grab your cape and join us this summer for the Summer of Superman on Moving Panels, where we honor the 30th anniversary of the death and return of Superman, episode by episode, reliving the awe, the heartache, and the undying legacy of the man who inspired millions. Don't miss a single installment of this thrilling podcast event. Subscribe now to Moving Panels on your favorite podcast platform and be a part of the Summer of Superman. Welcome to this Moving Panels one-shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation, and it is the Summer of Superman as we celebrate the 85th anniversary of Superman himself, and more specifically, the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman storyline from beginning to end. Yes, it started in 92. People have to stop reminding me of that. But the bulk of it was in 93, and so that is why we are putting it here. And we're going to start off giving a little history of the Death of Superman comics and what led to all of this, what was the event itself. And joining me for that is longtime guest host. Please welcome the man from Alaska, Chad Smith.
Hey, Laramy, how's it going, man?
I'm good. I'm excited about this. I have read through all of this again. Love reading this. I've read through all of it, like started from the beginning, went all the way through his return, reading every single issue. So over the course of probably 2 months, I have read, what would that be, like 40 something issues, maybe?
Yeah, it would surprise me. Yeah, absolutely. Especially once you get 5 different Supermen and all of their, yeah. So there's definitely... It would surprise me at all. There's 40 issues.
That was fun to try to keep up with the actual chronological version of the story.
Right.
Was which order I had to read each of the separate series. And then there's a Green Lantern issue that gets thrown in there. But we'll get to that when we get to the return of Superman.
Yeah. But
we're going to start off talking about the death of Superman. And let's talk about when the death of Superman started. And it all goes back to January of 1991 with Action Comics number 662, in which Clark proposes to Lois. Actually, he proposed before this, but he reveals in this episode to Lois that he is Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was DC's big plan. We're going to have the big wedding. Finally going to marry off Superman, or Clark Kent and Lois Lane. It's going to be huge. But you know what else was happening at this time? ABC decided to launch a television show called Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman.
Yep. And
ABC went to DC and said, hey, look, we're doing this show, and it's supposed to be the whole point of the show is it's the relationship of Lois and Clark.
It is in the title. Yeah.
Yes. And so we, as a show, want them to eventually get married. So we can't have them get married in the comic books just yet.
Because wasn't that even part of the agreement? Was that they had to kind of help one another, but they weren't supposed to interfere with the other one's plot? Like I remember reading that was part of the TV agreement.
Yeah, and that was the big one. Was, hey, you got to hold off on this wedding because we've got a new show. Because the show hadn't started yet, but It was, we've got this new show coming. And we can't have you get we can't have you have them get married yet, because we want the relation to develop between our Lois and Clark until eventually we marry them off, and the show ends after that because no one cared after they get married. It's always always that thing in television shows. You can't actually have can't have the main characters.
Get rid of the tension. Yeah.
Yeah. So the DC writers had to come up with a new story, because when they planned a whole year's worth of storytelling. Mm-hmm. So they had to scrap all of it. Had to come up with a thing. And this isn't just, as Chad and I were kind of alluding to a minute ago, this isn't just coming up with one comic run. There were 4 Superman titles. Right. You had Action Comics, Superman, The Adventures of Superman, and Superman Man of Steel. And they were all connected. So whatever was happening one would affect what was going on in the other. So you've got 4 monthly comics that you now have to come up with a new overarching storyline.
Yeah, 48 comics worth of storyline.
Yeah. So they would have this big meeting with all of the different writers and artists from each of the comics. They'd have this big, powwow meeting where they would plan everything out. And Jerry Orway would usually end the meetings jokingly saying, when they would kind of run into an obstacle, he would go, well, let's just kill him.
Yeah.
And this time they went, sure. Yeah. And that's what
I read that it was even on the like board of ideas. Like it was always just thumbtacked up there, and he would reference it to kind of close out meetings and all this kind of stuff. And then jokingly, when ABC comes around and says, yeah, you can't do what you already planned to do, he began a meeting with, time to kill Superman. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. Although I did make note for people who did not know this, Superman, this was not going to be the first time Superman had died.
Right.
So I went back and found 3. I knew of 2 of these already, but I found 3. So back in 1961, in Superman number 149, the issue is actually titled The Death of Superman. And he's killed by Lex Luthor. And he's killed by a kryptonite ray. I actually brought this up when we did Superman 3 a couple of weeks ago, or actually last week. Mm-hmm. And he dies. Superman dies. Then in the very next issue, Superman is alive again with no explanation whatsoever. They would later go back. Him. Yeah, they would later go back and retcon that this was an imaginary tale, that this one issue didn't really happen. Yeah. But they would also, I think during Crisis, they would explain that this was on a different Earth.
So 20 years later, they finally explained it? Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and I just realized when I said they Dallased him that half of the people listening have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything more recent we could come up with? I don't know. But
no, I think Dallas killed that concept for a good reason. But
well, I mean, that's just like jumping the shark. Like, who still knows that's a Happy Days reference?
Yeah. A handful of TV nerds. That's it.
Yeah. Then in 1966, so this is just 5 years later, Superman 188. This one I remembered because it is The School for Superman Assassins.
I gotta admit, that's a new one to me.
Yeah. So they are on I can't even remember now. Was it a different planet or a different dimension? And
so hang on a second. So if you have a school with a success rate of your graduates being absolutely 0, like how do you talk people into coming to your school? You're not very good at teaching what your entire curriculum is about.
I think we're just to assume that this is what they're training for, and they train until it can happen. But yeah, so he is actually killed by a person who is known as Murder Man.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because comics.
Yeah. And he is killed with kryptonite radio waves. And
so
then
he got Kryptonian microwaved.
I guess so, yes. That would be how it happened. Then the one I didn't know about, but discovered, In 1977, Justice League of America number 145, the issue is titled The Carnival of Souls, and Superman is killed by Count Crystal using magic.
Yeah.
I know they brought him back from that one. I can't remember how. I didn't write it down in my notes. I don't remember how they brought him back from the other one. It could have also been another, this didn't really happen type story. Because, that was the 60s. That was back when they didn't really care about continuity in comics. But because Superman had died before, and because other characters had died in comics before, they wanted this one to feel big and important. And so they kicked it all off in September of 1992 with Man of Steel number 17. Now, that story is just a generic Superman story. It's not even that great of a story. It's just a generic Superman story. But the last page is of a green gloved fist pounding a door, and there's 4 panels, and then it says Doomsday is coming. And then you saw that exact same thing, although with slight differences, in Superman number 73, Adventures of Superman 496, and then finally in Action Comics 683. And each time we see it, it looks like the exact same, but Doomsday's fist is slowly breaking away from the green glove, and you're seeing him actually pierce through the wall. The dent he's making is getting bigger until he finally breaks through in that final panel, which then leads into Man of Steel number 18, which again continues Superman's story because Superman doesn't realize anything's going on yet. But we see Doomsday break free, and we see him come out, and we start the rampage with Man of Steel number 18. So, do you remember these panels, or was it not until after the fact that you found out about these panels?
Oh, no, I knew about it. To give a little bit of context, I don't think we really talked about this before when we did the other episode about the movie We Shall Not Name. But it was I was 12 years old. Like, this was height of comic book love for me. This, you have to remember, this is all pre-internet, pre-tablet. You didn't have that kind of stuff to goof off with. When we took a road trip with my family, I brought comic books. Like, that's what I did. I saved virtually all of my money for Big League Chew bubblegum and comic books. And, I know it sounds like I'm from the 60s, but I swear it was the 90s. And so Superman was not one of my preferred brands. So I was huge into Batman and Spider-Man. Were like my 2 big dudes that I really followed. But even like there were guys at the comic shops and stuff that knew something was coming though. And so, just talking with them, and they'd be like, have you seen this going on with Superman? I'm like, I don't really care about Superman. He's not a big deal to me. And they were like, no. Like, you need to start reading Superman because something big's coming and it's going to be a big story. And so I remember kind of like, whatever, getting into it. And they were obviously not wrong. And so it was kind of a game changer for me in a lot of different ways of just not reading only the things that I personally really liked, that sort of thing, just spreading the love around. But I very vividly remember those panels and wondering, what Doomsday was and, what kind of event it was going to be, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And, Man of Steel 18, that was one of those, the cover, because that's when you finally saw Doomsday. Of course, he's in the green suit with all of the,
his
cables,
intergalactic straight jacket, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. But that one actually opens with the panels of him punching until he finally, we see the actual outside of the 4th panel is the outside of the cell that he's in. And you start seeing the 4 knuckle spikes start breaking through until he gets out. And then what I liked in that comic was you get the shot of Doomsday, like, I guess he's jumping out of the ground.
Right.
And he's in the pose with the one arm extended out. And then the very next page is an exact reflection of Superman in that exact pose. But again, the Superman story is going on. Again, he's having to deal with the underworlders, the creatures. He's having to deal with that. It's not that interesting of a story, but this is where they introduce Doomsday, and we get the famous scene that you talked about when we did cover the bad animated version of the story, in which he has the bird come to his hand,
right,
and then he crushes it.
Yeah,
and
which is a brilliant panel.
It's a brilliant thing, and then he laughs.
Yeah,
and so it's just okay. This guy is evil. Whoever this is, this is messed up.
I also just really, obviously in hindsight, like I didn't pick up on any of this at 12 years old, but the care with which this story was written is pretty incredible in the history of comic books. Because, I mean, obviously comic books, there's so many titles, that each of the two big houses bring out. Like any event that they can really orchestrate all of them kind of coming into the same story is pretty amazing. And this one is arguably the best and really incredible. The time they took to build the story you were just talking about, where Superman has this other kind of crisis he's dealing with, leads to the point where he's at the UN when the Justice League has to fight Doomsday. So, you have a reason that he's...
No, he's not at the UN. He's doing a interview with Cat Grant and a bunch of high school students.
I thought it was... I'm mixing something up, but he was... but it leads to that, is my point. Yeah. And you also have the way in which they broke the major, like the big league people out of the JLA. And so you don't have Wonder Woman, you don't have, Hal Jordan or a Green Lantern or the Flash there, so that when it comes time for the Justice League to engage Doomsday, you don't have to answer questions on why they don't die in the fight with Doomsday, why it becomes this one-on-one with Superman, because you kind of, you can't see those heroes giving up. And I'm not saying that anything's wrong with the Justice League members that did fight him, but you get, arguably a B team, not the main guys. Like, just the thought process that went into this story, how well put together it is, and how much over a much larger range than just, arguably the 4 or 5 titles that Superman is directly attached to get affected because of it.
Yeah, you get the current group of the Justice League, which is Ice and Fire and Guy Gardner and Bloodwind, Blue Beetle, Booster Gold. I think that's all of them. Oh, Maxima. Because Maxima's the one that almost actually helps out for a minute there. Right. But you've got all of them. They're getting taken out one by one. Superman then has to come and help, and that's Superman 74. That's when Superman officially joins the fight against Doomsday. Mm-hmm. And that's we get the story going from there, which then leads us into the 4 issues that really make up what is known as the Death of Superman.
Right.
Which started with Adventures of Superman number 497, which is titled Under Fire. This is when Superman begins to chase Doomsday after he takes out the Justice League. Then Action Comics 684, which is called Doomsday is Near. Doomsday finds out about Metropolis and decides to head to Metropolis. And Superman tries to stop him. Of course, that doesn't work out. And because Superman actually has to go back and save some people, which is what allows Doomsday to actually make it to Metropolis. Then you got Man of Steel number 19, which is titled Doomsday is Here. That is when the battle arrives in Metropolis. And finally, the infamous legendary Superman 75. This is now November of 1992 when all of this is happening. And this is the Death of Superman. Now, For those of you who don't know, I know Chad already knows this, but for those of you who don't know, that in these 4 issues, from beginning to end, there is a subtle but wonderful artistic thing that they do in which it is a countdown. Adventures of Superman 497, every page has 4 panels. Every single one. They might be different shapes, but there are only 4 panels in each. Action Comics 684, there are only 3 panels on every page. Man of Steel 19, 2 panels per every page. And then in Superman 75, there is only 1 panel on each page, leading up to a fold out on the very... that was something you didn't see in comics.
Right.
But there was a fold out on the last page, which is the famous shot that everybody knows of Superman dying in Lois's arms with the tattered cape flying in the background. Yeah, and all of the Jimmy Olsen and I want to say even Perry White's in the background. Ice and Bloodwind are there because they wanted them there. But yeah, you got all of that with Superman finally dying. Now, going back to ask this question, because I asked you about the panels leading up. Did you catch or did you know about this countdown when you were reading it, or was that something you learned about later? Because I'm going to admit I didn't learn about it till later.
Yeah, it was after the fact. But again, I think it wasn't that long. I was 12. I wasn't exactly counting panels and pages. But I do remember like some older comic book aficionados pointing that out after the fact. And, guys that were looking for that kind of stuff. Because, again, this is pre-internet. Like, you couldn't just go watch some YouTube video that explained it to you. So, but yeah, I do remember finding that out and being like, oh my gosh, like that's it. It's super well done. It's not the first or last time that something like that was done, but I think it was the first time that it was done like that blatantly. And let's be honest, it also artistically makes Superman 75 a beautiful comic book.
Those panels are gorgeous.
They're all covers.
Yeah.
It's a full comic book of covers. It's ridiculously well done. As it should be. I mean, it was meant to be the culmination of the biggest comic book story ever told. So, yeah, it lived up to that, is what I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say this is what got me into comics, because I think I was reading them already, but this is what hooked me into comics. This storyline, I will say, is probably one of the reasons why I do have such a fascination for Superman. Mm-hmm. Because even if you weren't into comics, you knew this was happening. I mean, this was on Entertainment Tonight. This was on just your local news. Yeah. They're talking about the lines at the comic books and at the comic book stores.
Yep.
And they're talking about just the fact that they're going to kill Superman. And we didn't have any comic book shops around us, but I know that a lot of comic book stores, like, this was a big deal for them because, all of a sudden you got people wanting to read this comic. And, it's like probably for a lot of people who are the younger group, this was like when a Harry Potter book came out, and you'd have the huge lines and what was going to happen. That's what this was for this Death of Superman comic, and I mean, stores were selling thousands of copies of it, and DC even went, we're going to make it even a bigger deal. So the Superman 75 was sold in a black bag with the red blood S on the front of it. When you open the black bag, not only did it have the comic inside of it, but it also had an armband.
Oh, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, that had the Superman symbol and said R.I.P.
Yep.
And yeah, it was a huge thing. And so, even though, like I said, didn't have the comic book stores, most of my comic books were bought at the grocery store. You couldn't live in 1992 without knowing this was happening. Yeah. Knowing this was happening. Yeah. Like, I don't care if you're a comic book fan, superhero fan or not, you knew about the death of Superman at the time.
Yeah, it was part of the culture. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts on the story? Let's just go over the story. Like, how did you think about the way I know we've hit on this a little bit already, but the way they introduced Doomsday, and then him really just kind of being an unstoppable force,
right?
As he's just moving, like he just constantly moves. He never goes backwards. It's just he's always going forward.
I think they did a great job of showing you just how dangerous he is. Like, at no point, at that time or since, have I questioned, why is it that this guy can kill Superman? Because he just, like you're saying, there's nothing before Superman that slows him down. The entire, arguably B-team Justice League, they're barely a blip on his radar. He literally beats them all. With an arm tied behind his back. Yeah, with an arm tied behind his back. And without really getting that worked up, even, it seems like. And then they do a good job of showing you that even Superman can't slow him down. He's not able to stop him, for various reasons of coming into Metropolis. And so then you have this imminent showdown. Like, Superman's going to draw a line in the sand, and they're going to have it out at this point. So there is a bit of belief. I also really like, and granted, this is, we're from a different era now that we have all these modern movies and great storytelling. It's easy to look back to the 60s and 70s and all those other elements you were talking about, the previous times that Superman, quote unquote, died. You always have a method of weakness. Like, we all know that Superman, is he has problems with kryptonite, he has problems with magic. Like, those are the two things that, are kind of his weaknesses. And so you don't have that this go round. It's just this dude beats him to a pulp. And
then the spikes can actually pierce Superman's skin.
Right. So he's just a different cat. Like, he is not your typical Superman villain at all. And so I really enjoyed just the breaking of the mold, because I am arguably one of those guys who is disinterested sometimes in Superman because of his invulnerability. It makes him a uninteresting character, arguably, sometimes. And now all of a sudden, that's not there anymore. Like, this dude is on par with Superman. He can hurt him. And the way that they told that story over time, taking issue to issue to show you, that happened. And the monologue going on, because
that's what that was the next thing I was going to ask you about, was the fact that most of it is what Superman's thinking.
The narration by Superman himself, when he's telling you that he's surprised that at this creature's strength, and that he can only, he's having to give 100% against this guy, and just all that kind of stuff makes it real. They did a great job of ratcheting up the stakes, so it doesn't at the end of it seem strange, and you're like, what the heck just happened? Like, why? How'd this guy kill Superman? That doesn't make any sense. There wasn't that. It was all believable. And so I think it's a fantastically written series.
Yeah, I agree. No, the stuff and the stuff with Superman, hearing his thoughts, gives so much emotion to it, because you're really seeing because they're really building up that who is Superman as a hero. Right. And the fact that he's thinking all this other stuff. Like,
what's he fighting for?
Yeah. I can't allow this to happen. I can't allow that to happen. This is happening to me right now, but I got to push through this. Or because he even tells you when he feels like one of his ribs is cracked, or he can't take a deep breath, and just all of this. But he keeps telling himself, I can't let him go any farther. This has to end now. And it is just such great storytelling. And I mean, you got to give credit where credit is due to all of these different writers, and how brilliant it was for them to have these meetings where they all get together and they come up with what the story is going to be. So here you have, Dan Jurgens, Roger Stern, Louise Simpson, Jerry Ordway, Carl Kessel, all getting together and coming up with this and being able to write, with essentially each one of them writing each of the issues,
right?
But it being such a great cohesive story that this is just great storytelling that you're talking about, starting in September of 92, ending in November of 92 with the death, and then we'll get into later in other one-shots everything that followed, which again takes us a year later, because the Return of Superman that story doesn't end until October of 93. So that is an entire year that this happened.
Yep.
Some people will go, oh, and then they didn't really kill Superman because they just brought him back. Yeah, but again, this was before the internet. No one knew what was happening. And when they killed Superman, as far as the world knew, Superman was dead.
After Funeral for a Friend, and I know we're going to talk about this later, there are no Superman episodes or comic book
issues
for 2
months. Mm-hmm.
They don't produce a Superman title.
No, they release the special. It was the News Time issue to make it look like the magazine, the Metropolis magazine. And you flip through it and you're reading these articles that are being written about the death. And that was it. They released that. And then they were like, and we're done.
Yep.
And it really felt like a closure to this is, Superman's dead.
Yeah, it was wild.
But yeah, so we're going to come back next week. We're going to talk about the animated movie, The Death of Superman, that came out a few years ago, which is a lot better than the one that Chad and I talked about a couple of weeks ago. But then Chad and I will be back for all of the one-shots that we're going to have over this summer of Superman. And we're going to talk about The Funeral for a Friend. We're going to talk about the world without Superman. And then ultimately we're going to end up talking about the legacy of this storyline. Both the good and the bad, because I will say, and I know Chad agrees with me, that there's some not great stuff that came out of them doing this storyline.
For sure.
But this is a huge event. I mean, the fact that Doomsday has now become such a big part of the DC universe. They've come back and told his origin story. They've done other storylines that feature Doomsday. They made
Superman into Doomsday.
Yeah, they did the Doomed storyline that turned Superman into Doomsday. They've done variations. There was they actually even brought it back. The 30th anniversary, they came out with a special comic that all of the original writers each wrote a story for. And in one of the stories, you find out that one of the workers that was helping to clean up Metropolis actually found one of Doomsday's spikes. And he kept it. Mm-hmm. And what you end up finding out is that over the years, it has slowly been infecting him.
Yeah.
And in this issue, he is then transformed into a Doomsday-like creature, which they end up calling Doombreaker, I think.
I don't remember.
And he fights Superman, and they think, oh no, it's going to happen again. And I won't spoil all of that. You can go out and read that one. But it's the Superman 30th anniversary. You got that story, which takes place in present time. The other three stories take place at the same time as the Death of Superman story. Mm-hmm. So you've got one story in which Martha and Jonathan, it's more of what they were experiencing, watching it all happen from home.
Right.
Then the third story is, I forgot what order they go in, but the third story is Guardian, and finding out a little bit more about what Guardian was experiencing, especially when Superman and Doomsday reached the Cadmus project and were fighting in the habitat and destroy the habitat and all. So you get Guardian's perspective on that. And then the fourth story is actually John Henry Irons and finding out that he actually attempted to help even before he was Steel.
Yep.
Just as a man, and how he actually did did some very heroic stuff while the battle between Superman and Doomsday was going on. So that's a good read. So you can go out and get that one, celebrate the 30th anniversary. I will admit I have not read this, but Roger Stern actually put the whole Death of Superman into novel form. And I think it's called The Death and Life of Superman. My mind just went blank. I'm turning around to look at it, and I can't eyeball it on my shelf, but I know I own it. But he did that, and Louise Simpson did like a young adult version of it, which follows Jimmy Olsen, I think. So you can also go out and read those. But I think we're gonna wrap that up here. And again, next week we'll talk about it some more because we're gonna talk about the animated movie, The Death of Superman. And I'm excited. I could really just keep talking about this. We just don't need to because we got a whole summer of Superman to do this. Yep. So, but any last words you have to say, Chad?
No, not. I mean, again, this is just landmark storytelling in general, not just best comic run ever, but it's a fantastic storyline. Period. Just I really am a little frustrated that we're not going to get to hear Bethany's take on it. So, as a first-time story reader, but
yeah, the plan was for Bethany to be involved in this one shot because Bethany, for the very first time, has read this. But Bethany was under the weather, so I asked Chad to come in. But I do plan on Bethany joining me as we talk about the animated movie. So cool. we will still get that that side to find out what it was like for someone 30 years after the fact,
right, to
experience the death of Superman, and even someone who's not really a comic book fan,
right.
So that'll be interesting. But we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up for today. Again, we're gonna go through the whole month of June. I think we'll even bleed into July as we go through the Funeral for a Friend, the Reign of Superman, the Return of Superman, and then, like I said, Chad and I are even going to discuss the legacy of this epic storyline from 30 years ago, 3 decades back. That, again, people like Chad and I, this was right at the height of our introduction into comics, and as we were young comic book readers ourselves in the preteen age. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from 3 nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.